Turning to this evening's programs, Jennifer Ernstfield James is a senior writer for Country Home magazine and a historic preservation specialist, having just completed a master's degree in historic preservation. Her husband Larry is an attorney and a developer, and together they're going to tell and show us about their 3-year restoration of the historic Vale Kinney House in Des Moines. They saved the 1880s Victorian from the wrecking ball, purchasing it for $1 and then spending considerably more than that, and moving it several blocks. They will address the basics of house moving, the economic benefits of historic preservation, and some of the techniques they've used for recycling house parts and finding architectural salvage. Following their presentation, Roger Gwinnett, member of Iowa City's Friends of Historic Preservation Group, will speak briefly about some local house moving experiences as well. Please join me in welcoming Jen and Larry.
Thank you, Andrea. Tonight we'd like to share, like she said, our experiences with moving a house near Drake University in Des Moines. My wife and I have lived there for about 7 years. I went to law school at Drake, and we liked the neighborhood so much we decided to stay. There's a lot to cover tonight, and we've structured the presentation into several areas. First of all, we've got a brief overview of the project, a look at the house move. We've got several photos we're going to show of the house move itself. Steps we took in this particular project to try to maintain whatever historic fabric was left of the house. There wasn't much to start with, to be honest with you. Ways we incorporated salvage materials from other properties into this house to kind of bring back at least the character that existed in the home before we began. We're also going to cover strategies for researching the history of a house, how to find houses to move and basic house moving steps, and tips for any restoration project. As I said, we've got about 80 photographs on our PowerPoint presentation to show you. And at any time, we're trying to keep this very informal. But please ask questions if you have them throughout the presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen, and she's going to give you kind of the project overview.
All right. In giving this brief overview, I'd like to just read a very short essay that I wrote that served as the basis for the chronicle of our project that ran in Country Home magazine in the January-February issue from 2004. And I've got some copies of it right here, and anyone who'd like can have a copy of it. And doing the project for the magazine gave us a timeline that we may not have followed otherwise, and so that helped us get the project done in 3 years and allowed us to really keep probably better track of what we were doing and when we were doing it than we would have otherwise. So that I'll just read this essay, and then the rest of the time we're not going to be reading things. Propped up against a windowsill in a gutted 1880s Victorian in Des Moines, Iowa, the letter postmarked 1893 told the sad tale of a sister summoning home her brother, graduate student Charlie Kinney, to attend to their ailing father. It was the first of many intriguing links to the past dwellers of the historic house that helped persuade my husband Larry and I to save it from the wrecking ball. A newspaper story telling of the imminent demolition of the Vale Kinney house propelled us to tour the gutted 2.5-story vernacular Victorian and buy it for $1, with the caveat that it had to be moved off its lot within months. It wasn't the best timing for us. We'd just finished an extensive 2-year restoration of a colonial revival house a few blocks away. Larry was finishing up his last semester of law school and studying for the bar exam, and I was preparing to start a 3-year master's degree in historic preservation. But with a deep breath, we decided to sell our just restored home, live with relatives during the rehab for a year, and save the Vale Kinney house. But there wasn't a lot left to save. Salvagers had removed nearly every door, trim piece, and floorboard. Right here, I'm standing on one little piece of remaining flooring, sifting through pictures that were left from a window seat that used to be in that position. So each time we entered the house, we had to take care not to fall through the floor joists into the basement. And from the basement, we could look up and see the attic roof, or the underside of the roof up in the attic. So few besides us could really see the potential of what became known as kind of the neighborhood wreck. But slowly, the house revealed itself as we prepared for the midnight move to the new lot 4 blocks away. While sledging out broken plaster, Larry discovered fire damage, an old staircase, and other evidence of ancient remodelings. Meanwhile, I sifted through the rubble, picking up letters that told of former occupants and old photos left as trash. Charles Kinney, a Drake University alum and chemistry professor who lived in the house from about 1908 until his death in the early 1960s, was a shutterbug, and his photos provided important documentation that helped us accurately restore the house and receive state tax credits that we were eligible for because the house is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. This is one of hundreds of old photos that we found. A circa 1910 snapshot of his son, for example, shows the rear of the house before a second-story sleeping porch was added on top. And this is one of those photos that shows it. So from these photographs, we were able to rebuild the addition that we had to remove from the house to move it, following the older design that we saw in those photos. Larry worked as both a general contractor and general laborer, and together we tackled the finish work with help from our parents. Within 2 years, the shell of an old house was transformed into our new home. In the process, Larry passed his bar exam, which he took a few weeks after the house move. I finished my master's thesis this summer, and we now share the house with a Sheltie that we named Charlie. And a lithograph of Charles Kinney that we found in the house proudly hangs in the parlor. And that is this picture right here. So that's just a very brief overview, and Larry's now going to talk about more of the nuts and bolts of saving the house from the wrecking ball. Oops.
It's my first time using a... That is all... well, the picture is not very good. You think we'd have better pictures. That's taken from the magazine. We scanned it in. But that's actually cedar siding, cedar lap siding. It's painted, but that's all cedar. On the right, the main portion of the house is mostly original, and I'll explain what we had to do in order to add that addition on the back. So as Jen said, this house was slated to be demolished in December of 2000. It was to make way for additional campus green space, one of the few remaining houses on the Drake University campus. Originally, the area where Drake University is, like many universities, they expand over time, and that area used to be filled with houses. Well, over the past 100 years, the area has undergone campus expansion, and this was one of the few remaining houses. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places due to its connection to the founding of Drake University. The Marion Vale, Jen will speak about this, Marion Vale built the house in approximately 1887, and she sent her daughters to Drake. Drake University started the campus by selling off lots, like a subdivision. And so they funded the university that way. And this is one of the lots that they sold. Now, this house had been in the possession of the Kinney family from approximately, we think, 1909 or so till 2000. So 91 years, quite a long time. There's 3 generations of the Kinney family lived there. Professor Charles Kinney was a chemistry professor at Drake University. And the last of the Kinney family that lived in the house passed away in 2000. Well, the family knew of Drake University's interest in the property. The university approached the family to purchase it, and because no one in their right mind thought they could move this house, there was plans to demolish it. Well, in the process, there was an estate sale, and then the family decided, well, we might as well allow salvagers to go in there and take the woodwork out so we can save that from the landfill, which we understand. But after that was done, then a long chain of events. The neighborhood association found out about the demolition. We just didn't know about it until that point. So about December 2000, we found out about that demolition, and we asked to look at the house. And so working with Drake, we toured the house. By that time, the salvagers had already been through the house, and we've shown you, several pictures of the condition of the house when we first entered it. Now, looking at these pictures, you say, well, okay, why go to the trouble of moving a structure that's already been gutted? All the woodwork's been taken out. All the flooring's been taken out. There's really nothing left except the exterior. Well, one of the things we really felt that was important is this house was very significant due to its connection to Drake University. We both are strong university supporters and university graduate. We felt that this house needed to be there just for the history of the area. It's very important. The fact remained, even though with all the destruction the house had undergone by the salvagers, the exterior of the house was still intact. And what essentially what the State Historic Preservation Office was concerned about was that the house, at the very least, remained standing, that the exterior be restored to its original condition, that the interior be remodeled in a somewhat sensitive way, although they don't look at the interiors as the exterior did. One of the other things we really were interested in about this house is that it's built out of old growth timber. Anyone that's worked with an old house knows that you can barely even screw in or drive a nail through this old growth timber. We didn't want to see that going to the landfill. We found a vacant lot that was nearby that faced the house would end up facing the same direction as it did, an eastern-facing direction, and we wanted to fill a vacant lot in the Drake neighborhood. Finally, we also wanted to build the city of Des Moines' tax base. By keeping a house like this and restoring it, you're building the city's tax base. So those were our basic reasons for wanting to move this. Here's the front of the house now as it appears today. We started off with the picture of the house as it appeared initially. This is the lot that we started with. This lot sits in between two Victorians of a similar age. The lot had been the site of a Victorian that had been demolished as a public nuisance in 1990, and we approached the owner with our idea, and he owns the property on the right there. You can't see it in the picture, but it's a very nicely restored Victorian. He uses a duplex rental. He was intrigued by the idea, thought it was something that we could really fit in well with the neighborhood, and so he was kind enough to sell us the lot. It was about the most perfect location we could find. One of the things that we had to consider, and there was specific importance to the State Historic Preservation Office, was the fact that the house was going to be situated on one of the subdivisions that was originally subdivided by Drake University, because that's one of the reasons it was historic, okay, the tie to the university. And the second reason was that they like to see the house facing east like it always had been. Now, you look at the house and it's a nice Victorian, but it's not a lavishly, Queen Anne Victorian, lavishly ornate. Their architecture is not really what's important. What's important was the connection to Drake University. And so that's why this lot was also important, because it did fit those criteria. We had moved, prior to this house, we had moved another house in the neighborhood, a American Foursquare that was going to be demolished to make way for a Walgreens. And we, again, approached the owner, Drake University, and they worked with us they gave us the house for $1, and we moved that to a new lot. That move was easy. We jacked up the house, and I'll explain everything about how you go about moving a house later. It took us 45 minutes to roll down the street from the old lot to the new lot, and that move, okay? So we thought, okay, we know how to do this now. We're pros. we've done this thing. It's not that hard. I mean, it's hard, but it's not impossible. And so we looked at this and we said, well, let's move this one. Well, this house took 13 hours to move down the street, and the whole way we were watching the house get hit with branches and getting racked from side to side, and just not a great house move. The house mover we used was O'Neill House Moving for both projects, and I cannot say enough good about those guys. For the bad situation, they were put in this move. And part of the blame lies on us, but part of the blame does not lie with us. The move went well, and they were able to get the house in one piece to the lot. The route we took was started on the Drake University campus. This is a picture of the house rolling down the lot. The City of Des Moines regulations specify you have to move a house at midnight. So this is about probably 12:15 at night on July 6, 2001. We had the house jacked up at that point. We had the trailer put under the house, the foundation. They pulled the house off the foundation. They did that during the day, and at night they came off and rolled it down the street. This right here is the Sheslow Auditorium. I don't know if you're familiar with Drake University's campus. It's right behind Old Main, the main campus building. Our plan was initially to roll the house down. This is the corner of 25th and University. Our plan was to roll the house down from, this is 25th Street here, was to continue down 25th Street, which is a very wide open street. For reasons we still don't understand, we were asked at the last minute by a city official to move to 26th Street and move down there. And there lies the problem. That's what happened, I think, to make the house move very difficult. But nonetheless, this is turning the corner. This is about 6 a.m. now. At this point, we had been stuck here. In many ways, let me just interrupt myself. In many ways, this is like the worst case scenario, just so you understand. I mean, moving a house does not have to be this difficult, as I'm sure people in this room can tell you. But in the city, you run into a lot of problems moving a house, and we ran into about every one of them in this move. Right here, there's a set of wires across the street. Looking at the wires, you can tell there's cable, there's phone, things like that. But you don't know every company that's on in the right-of-way. The city has a list of companies to contact, and you have Quest and Mid-American and all those companies. Well, on that list, not every company was listed, and so we didn't know some of the companies. So about 2 in the morning, a cable guy came up to me and said, okay, when's McLeod going to get out here and take down this fiber optic line? I said, what are you talking about? He said, there's a fiber optic line that is there, and we're not touching it, because if we break it, it's $5,000 fine. I said, oh my God. And I was just almost in tears at that point, because it had already taken twice as long as our previous move. Anyway, we got McLeod out there. They got the line dropped, and by 5:30, 6 a.m., we pulled around the corner here.
Did you say how fast you were going?
This was at a crawl. This was really at a crawl. If you're in the country, or if, those guys can go 5, 10, 15 miles an hour or faster, depending on the size of the house. It's on a semi, and it can move along pretty fast. This is right in front of Old Main. By this time is about 7 o'clock in the morning. We just turned the corner down 26th Street off University Avenue. And this was the following day. I think at this point, my wife and I went over to Drake Diner, and we're about ready to just give up. It's about 7:30 in the morning. You see here, all along here, these trees that were supposed to be trimmed all the way up, and they weren't. One of the problems with this route was that there were so many trees, and this house is so large, we were having a difficulty fitting this thing down the street. So these guys, these house movers, basically, along with the city forestry department, we had to hack our way down the street. This shows some of the city forestry workers at work. You look down the street today, you can't tell the trees were cut, but at the time, neighbors weren't too happy with us. This is some of the damage that was done along the route. You can see where the branches came across. Now, one of the things we had to do in preparation for this move was take off the front porch here and a back addition. Let's see if I've got that. We had to take off the back addition that was right here. Now, in order to even try to move the house down the street, we had to take those things off. Now, the front porch, as you remember by the initial photo, went all the way across the front of the house. And we took that apart. We kept every piece, the newel posts, the scroll work, every piece that was salvageable, we kept. Then what we did was, when we got on the new foundation, we basically used as many parts as we could, and I'll talk about that, to put the porch back together as it looked. In the back of the house, like I said, we had to cut the back of the house off. It was a 2-story addition. First story was a kitchen and bathroom, and the second story was a sleeping porch that was added approximately 1916 that we can tell from looking through our records. After we removed the second story sleeping porch, we discovered a ghost on the wood of the old roof and the roof line. So we could tell, okay, at one time this had been a one-story addition. Then by looking at the photographs that we found, we did discover that in fact was a one-story addition. And so what we did was we matched the original footprint of the addition and built it as best we could figure out it had been. This is just pulling the house onto the foundation. This is the addition as it appeared before the move. Now, working with architect Linda Alfson in Des Moines, she helped us really put this addition back together. We made measurements before the move, and like I said, we had to. The choice was to tear the house down on the site completely or to tear off the addition and move it to a new site and rebuild it the best we could. We measured the original window openings as they appeared at the site. Again, we followed you can barely see where the roof was there. And we prepared plans to put it back together as best we could determine. This is after we applied the cedar siding on the back. Again, there's different sized windows to just show where those windows were. We did add this window inside to get more light. We actually vaulted the ceiling on the inside. And so what we tried to do was put the addition back in the house as it originally appeared. And we determined that from photographs and the ghost on the side of the house. And please interrupt me if I'm just rambling on here, because I don't know if this is interesting or not. One of the things we did, and this is, again, like I said, we tried anything we could to preserve whatever of the original fabric there was of the house. There wasn't that much left, so instead of going through and putting all new windows in, which we could have done, we said, well, okay, we've got at least the original windows, the double-hung windows. Let's reuse them. And so I spent about 6 months taking the stuff called soy gel, which is a non-toxic stripper made from soybeans, and stripped all the old paint off the windows inside and out, unstuck the windows because they hadn't been used for so many years, took off the old putty and reglazed all the windows. That really took me, as you can see, I was deep in thought there. That's how they appeared after we put them back up. And I learned so much doing this project. I mean, I am the first one to tell you that I am not a contractor guy. I do not do well. I mean, I know what my limitations are, but I really did learn how to rebuild these windows, and that's something I really feel proud of. Like I said, getting back to the front porch, we had not only the photo, the appearance as the porch appeared right before we moved it. We took measurements and saved everything, but we also had these historic photographs showing exactly how the porch appeared before, and it really was in about the same exact shape as it had been. Some of the porch posts had completely rotted away, so we had to get those remilled. We got those remilled at a place called Cinder Wit. I think it's in North Dakota. And they did a great job. They took one of the posts and they matched it. We had to mail them an existing post, and they remilled it so it really matches well. This is after we moved the house on the foundation from the front. We just started putting the porch back together. This is, again, like I said, we tried to use as many of the original posts as we could. This one is a new one, but the rest we reused. And I made, you can't see around this photo, but I made a lot of use of Bondo, auto body epoxy, to put some of these back together, and they've held. They're structurally sound. This is Bondo right here. I pretty much rebuilt that entirely with Bondo. And that's so much cheaper than going and getting that epoxy at the hardware store. You can buy a gallon of it for $10. Just another view of the porch. Here's how the porch appears today. Like I said, all these are original pieces here, and the porch posts are original for the most part. These scrolls, some of them are original, but some of them they were completely coming apart, and so we had those remade in Des Moines. We put the tongue and groove beadboard ceiling back and used amber shellac to shellac the ceiling. We used treated southern pine tongue and groove porch flooring. Then here's how the back porch appears. This was about as close as we could come up with how the porch appeared, based on photographs. Like I said, we talked about the addition, what we had to go through to get the look that we wanted, and to really make it as much as possible to make it appropriate to the house. We did do a couple things different. We widened the back porch. It's a little bit deeper than it had been. There was a drainage problem before because it was so narrow. And some of the siding pieces in the house, we tried, like I said, the best we could to keep whatever's there. Some of them were just rotten beyond repair. So we did replace like some siding up here with new cedar siding. And of course, all the siding on the back here is new cedar. We used American Traditions paint from Lowe's. They have a historic line of paints, and we actually learned one of the things we discovered after we'd picked the color. We thought, okay, we like this color, and we spent a lot of time doing it. And it was pretty cool because we looked at a 1902 yearbook from Drake and discovered that there was a mention in there. What they said was the house that one of the previous occupants, but in between Marion Vale and Charles Kinney, had been Professor Edward Ott, who was a Drake oratory professor, and they talked about his house as being a yellow cottage. So that was pretty interesting. One of the things that we did differently in this house that we would not recommend overall is the complete removal of the plaster and the lath. Now, and because most historic preservationists will tell you, again, it's part of the historic fabric of the house. But what had happened to this house was it had been so torn apart. There wasn't a lot left inside to salvage. All the plaster was broken apart, and it wasn't even the kind of situation where we could have repaired many of the walls. So in tearing off the plaster and lath, we decided, okay, well, we need to insulate this thing really well. We used a product called Isonine insulation, which is a spray-on foam. They used it, it's from a company here in Iowa, and really, really, really are happy with the results with that. And it was really cool to see them put it on. They just completely fill the cavity in the house. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Jen, and she's going to talk about some of the salvage materials we used in the house. And then later on, we'll talk more about specifically how to go about moving a house. Jen?
One other reason why we removed the plaster was that we also had to meet new building code. The city considered the house new construction because it was on a new foundation, and so that required new wiring. It was old knob and tube wiring, which may have needed replacing anyway, and all new plumbing and fire escapes, all those types of things we had to meet new code for. So again, it's not typical for most house restoration projects, and that was, I think, the point that Larry was trying to make there, is that usually if we're approaching a house, we like to keep the old plaster. In this case, it was not a viable option for us. So what we tried to do inside, because so much had been removed in the house, and there also were two fires that happened in the house, one in 1891 and one in 1914. There had been various remodelings that had gone on in the interiors, and then what had been there, which was an amalgamation of 1890s trim and 19-teens trim that had been added at a later date in another style. All of that had been salvaged out, and so we were left with this shell, and how do you put it back together again? So one of the things that we tried to do was look for clues as to what had been there before. And when we were removing the damaged plaster, what we discovered was that after these fires, they had turned the old trim and used it as the lath in rebuilding the plaster after these fires. And so we looked at what the trim profiles were and used that as our clue for what trim we would add back into the house. So we kind of took it back a step. Rather than the colonial revival / craftsman style trim that had been added sometime after the 1914 fire, we took it back to this older trim that had more of a Victorian profile to it. And we were lucky to find at a local salvage yard in Des Moines a whole cache of trim that was coming out of a house that was being torn down for a church parking lot. So we were able to buy an entire house worth of trim. And where we didn't have enough of it, we were able to get some local carpenters to remill some pieces that matched. We also turned to our neighbors for looking for salvage material. We had one interior door that was left. It was a 4-panel door, which is a common Victorian door. And so we used that as our template for looking for doors. And one of our neighbors happened to have 20 fir doors, which we knew was a material that had been used in the house. So we purchased those doors for a very reasonable price. Then we went about stripping them and locating another exterior door. And what we found, as Larry mentioned, is that Bondo really is a great way to economically put back together pieces of wood that have cracks or have broken pieces from them. And then we also used a product available at Sherwin-Williams. It's called Zim, XIM, which is very good for, it's a primer and sealer that if a piece of wood has already been painted, that you can paint over it and not have the paint peel off. Another thing that we used in the house that has a recycled past as well is the flooring, and that's recycled barn wood coming from old barns that are being taken down, remilled into flooring. And so that's what you can see in this picture here. And this is a picture showing, again, using some new wood materials that have a vintage look. It's not necessarily a historic look, in that vaulted ceiling using cardboard siding. And this is the way the room looks when it's finished. The paint is over the trim, so we don't have 5 colors of trim anymore, and the ceiling is painted and the floors are refinished. And here's Larry using paint over a door that was thrown out by another set of neighbors as trash, and we added a piece on the bottom to make it tall enough, used Bondo to fill up cracks and dings, and when it's painted, you can't tell at all. And here's the door before it was finished being painted. Another way that we used salvage was in our kitchen. We wanted to have a look of a period-style kitchen, and when we were looking at new stock cabinets and even new custom cabinets, we just weren't finding anything that looked appropriate. And while visiting my parents up in the Twin Cities, we stopped at a favorite salvage yard up there and happened across a whole apartment's worth of cabinets that were pulled out of an early 1900s apartment house. So we bought 2 apartments worth of cabinets, and using some carpenters, we were able to piece them together into cabinetry for our kitchen. And we loved the pull-down bins that were there, the crystal knobs, and the tall pantry cabinets that just were nothing like that you could find coming out of stock cabinetry. Some of the pieces had been so stained with grease that we ended up having to paint the lower cabinets. This is the area that became the kitchen. I think at one time this had originally been the kitchen before the rear addition was built. Here's the space before we started putting things back into it. And here's that same corner after we were finished. And the farm table that's in the kitchen is actually another little salvage story. In the basement of a commercial building a few blocks away, we found the old table. The top had been rotted. It was down a basement for at least 50 years. So we had a new top added and used the old legs. Another area that we used salvage was in the parlor. The house did not have a fireplace originally, but that was one of the things that we had really mixed emotions about leaving our old house, is that we loved our wood-burning fireplace. And since there was a lot of space on the wall in the parlor, we decided to add a fireplace. So here we're building the firebox. We found a tile that was being manufactured in the same way as the tile that is seen in a lot of surrounds in houses from the late 1800s, early 1900s. And then we found this mantle in an old barn. It was covered in paint and you couldn't see the quarter-sawn oak at all. But after it was refinished, it just looked incredibly beautiful. And in the background you can see the staircase there. The staircase, too, is a story of using salvage along with new wood. And that was found in a neighbor's basement. It was something that came with their house when they bought it. The people that they bought the house from had planned on using it in some sort of project and never had. And so I filed that away and said, "Oh, remember that staircase you have in your basement? I think we have a use for it." And this is the other side of the room here. This is the staircase before. You can see where the profile of the steps that had been taken out. This is how we got up before we had the staircase. We used a ladder. And this is the space where the stairs were built. The salvage pieces before we put them in. And here you can see the contrast of the old and new wood. Using stain and stripping off the old varnish, we were able to match the old and new wood. We used a similar approach in the upstairs bathroom, which we call our salvage bath. It's a mixture of various found objects, and here's our recipe. We took one clawfoot bathtub that was found in Grandma's garage and put that in this little room. We also found a sink with faucets, and we pulled that out of a trash bin on a neighborhood cleanup day. We pulled a grungy medicine cabinet out of a house that was condemned, and we had a neighborhood salvage day that time. We took a fur door from our neighbor's closet, and a crystal doorknob from our parents' house. And as we like to say, we mixed well with paint, elbow grease, and new finishes. And here is a floor that we put in. We worked hard to make sure that our hexagonal tile floors, which are still manufactured new today, but using the same look as when they were 100 years ago or so, would look appropriate. And so we matched the grout to the grout that was used in older houses. Here's the medicine cabinet undergoing refinishing and afterward. And here's the bathroom as it appeared in the magazine story. Across from that bathroom, we wanted to have a linen closet or some sort of storage. And in the same barn that we found the mantle, we found an old jelly jar cabinet, canning jar cabinet, and had that installed. It was used as like a BB gun target for a while, and so there were hundreds of BBs stuck into the exterior of it. So some of them came out, some of them got patched over, and some of them are still there as a little story. And here I am taking off the old finish. This is a shot of the one, it's a three-quarter bath, I guess you could say, that's off of our bedroom. And here what we did is we did a little bit of recycling of new materials. We had some leftover porch flooring, and we used that to create a wainscot around the bathroom. And for the sink, we needed to fit the pipes down for the waistline and so forth. And so we built out the wall a little bit and just created a shelf as a way of dealing with that problem. We used an old window to create a door on the cabinet. Here's the space as the floor's going in. And here's a picture of what went on in our basement quite a bit, refinishing the doors. Another way that we used recycled materials is on the exterior with the landscaping. Most of the plants around the outside of the house are either replicas of plants that we saw at the old house site, actual plants that we dug up, or plants from neighbors that have old houses surrounding us. And then we also use salvage brick to create the walkways around the house. And from that pile of bricks came our stairs up to the house. So with that, I'm going to segue from talking about salvage to talking about how you can find salvage materials. I've mentioned a few of the ways. Sometimes even a house itself can yield the salvage materials. We were lucky enough to find in one house that we were working on, up in the attic behind a false wall, the original swinging doors that went from the kitchen to the dining room. So sometimes just looking closely in your own house, you can find missing materials. And networking with neighbors is a really great idea if you live in an old neighborhood or whatever time period your neighborhood is. Oftentimes the same carpenters or the same firms might have been building houses, and so you can find similar pieces that way. Trash day was a really good way that we found a lot of pieces of architectural salvage. We found most of our iron grates, our floor grates, by looking at trash day. And they retail new for about $200 as replicas, and I've seen them for $100 or more in architectural salvage shops. So we got them free on trash day. Antique shops, garage sales, and of course salvage yards are all great places to go as well. And one of the things that we really tried to do was look at pieces as we saw they could be once we had finished them rather than looking at flaws. And so a door that somebody was throwing away became our back door to our house. We knew that we could put it back together. The same way we found a quarter sawn oak door. It was at a salvage yard and had a piece of plywood screwed onto it. As soon as we popped the plywood off, filled up the holes, we had a beautiful door, and we bought it for $10. So those are just a few ideas. And Traditional Building Magazine is a really good place, a really good resource looking at their website if you're looking for architectural salvage yards. And then just a little bit about researching the history of a house. I was really fascinated to kind of stumble into this boxes and boxes worth of ephemera that were left by this one family and that had lived in our house for almost 100 years. But the people that had lived there beforehand were a little bit of a mystery. And so we wanted to know more about the early part of the history of the house. And so what we did is we really did a thorough search of all sorts of different records that we could. Some of them were public records, some of them belonged to family members, and some of them were in the library at the university. I guess some of the reasons why people are interested in researching the history of the house are not only for National Register nominations, which can make houses eligible for tax credits, but also to find photographs or find these links to the past so that we understand more fully what it is, this legacy that we're working on as we're restoring houses. So just a few tips that I found as I was doing research was, one, it was really helpful to always make photocopies. Sometimes I didn't really understand what a piece of information was until later on, and by making the photocopy, I could later go back to it and say, oh, there's this other piece of information here that I didn't understand earlier. I started my research by tracing the ownership chain, and oftentimes you can do this by just looking at the abstract. In this case, there was no abstract, and because we were moving from one lot to another, the abstract is the history of the land, and we were acquiring a new lot, and so there was no need to make a new abstract. So I needed to replicate the information that would have been in the abstract, and was able to do that by looking at county records, the land records. And through that, we learned that Mrs. Vale purchased the lot in 1884 and appears to have moved into the house sometime around 1887, 1888, which is the year that the family first appears in the city directory. The city directories became a very good tool for me in verifying who was living at the house and who was boarding at the house. And sometimes that can be an interesting bit of history too. It's not always who was the owner who was living in the house. Another piece of information that, or another source of information besides looking at the library, was the Historical Society. And sometimes you can find that there has already been a research project undertaken for a particular property or for a related property that can yield information. And in our case, the National Register nomination had a brief overview of the history of the house. Public records, of course, are a very good source depending on how good the record keeping has been in your area. In Des Moines, unfortunately, there are no building permit records prior to 1920, and after 1920 there's only a log of what permits were issued, not the actual permits. So that's a bit of a dead end in our city. One source that I think is a really fabulous tool are what are called Sanborn maps. They're fire maps, fire insurance maps that were often produced by the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company. Oops. Oh, here we go. And this is the Sanborn map from 1901 showing the house as it looked at that time. And not only do you get the profile, the footprint of the house, but it tells you how many stories it was. It tells you the materials that were used. It shows any outbuildings that were used. It gives you the address and the name of the street, which sometimes change over time. And it also shows where porches exist. And from this, we could see that there was a little bit of a change with the way that the front of the house looked. Initially, the bay window was fully articulated, and at a later point, that was bumped out a little bit to accommodate a new entryway for the new staircase that was added. Clippings files and newspaper indexes are also very helpful places to look, and I'm going to just jump back here a little bit. It's through newspapers that we found some really wonderful, not me personally, but the Neighborhood Association has compiled a record of advertisements from the early sales of lots in the neighborhood. And that's one of the many different types of resources available in newspapers. And so this is showing lots available in the general vicinity where the house previously was located. And finally, the internet can actually be a great source of information too. And it was a combination of looking at the internet and looking at an old family tree that had been put together that I was able to track down some of the Kinney relatives who were also doing genealogy and research, and we were able to pool our resources. And I had all these photos, and they had letters that were written by family members, one of them describing the fire that happened in 1914, so we had a first-person account of that. And these are just some additional photos of the Kinney family. And a few other different types of records that are great resources too are Mormon genealogy records, federal and state censuses, who's who directories, obituaries, cemetery rosters, wills, and of course public libraries are great resources for all of those different types of resources. One caveat is that there are discrepancies. Sometimes you feel so excited you found this missing link piece of information, but then when you go to compare it with other pieces of information, they conflict, and that seems to be the case more often than not. So as you're puzzling together the pieces of this history of the house, it really may yield more questions than it does answers. But the end result sometimes can mean finding a vintage photo of a house that can help you as you're putting together, restoring a porch, for example. Or it can be as complex as a formal nomination for the National Register. One book that I'll mention that's a helpful beginner's guide for researching the history of the house is Betsy Green's Discovering the History of Your House in Your Neighborhood. So with that, Larry's going to tell a little bit about how to find houses to move and some basic steps about moving them.
I'm just going to mention a couple more things real quick about this stuff that we found. We literally, when I opened the door, we saw the destruction of the house. We thought, there's no way we're doing this deal. But we looked, and the first thing I came across, Jen mentioned in the beginning, but I want to just say this again. I still can't believe it happened that way. Walked in the door, right on, there was no floors, there was no ceilings, no walls. Everything was torn out, but right on the windowsill was a letter. And I took the letter down, and it was from 1893. On the windowsill, right next to, and there was all this stuff. And so then the other stuff we found in there was the family had just left there. They had left boxes and boxes of all these photographs and letters. And after we thought we'd taken everything out of the house to look through, still one day when we were at our wits' end because we couldn't believe we were doing this and got really down about this is going to take forever and it's so hard. Like under a piece of trim on the second floor we found a wedding invitation to Marion Vale's daughter's wedding. I mean, it was on the floor. So that just kind of, I don't believe in ghosts, but that was kind of weird. I'm going to skip. I know we're getting close to the debates, and I'm sure a lot of folks want to see those too. But I'll just tell you real quick about how to find houses to move. Moving a house is a last resort. You don't want to move a house from its historical site. But there are times when new buildings are being built. In our case, universities expanding. Things happen. Read the newspaper like a tip sheet. You see, okay, this building is going up. What's there now? Maybe you'll find a house you can buy. Check with local city officials. They know a lot about what's going on. They might have a house that you could look at. If you might, in your municipality, find in the country, for example, a lot of times they'll burn old farmhouses. We'll see if you can go in first and strip out all the materials that's there, at least to save that. Get on the Iowa DOT has a website for houses that need to be moved for road expansion. Get on that. So maybe there'll be a house in your area you're interested in. Just go in areas of the city. Like Drake is a transitional neighborhood, and there's a lot of good things happening, but a lot of times that means that old things are being torn down. So look for those kinds of things. And then just, get involved, like your local historic preservation groups. People really are keyed into this stuff. And, it did cost $1, but, we spent a lot of money on it, and it's not something that's cheap to do, but at the same time, we think it's very, very much worth it. And I think the fact you're sitting here tonight just is evidence that you're interested in preserving old houses. And there's just a sense of keeping the character of a place. And this is one of those place-making things that is in our neighborhood that we really felt strongly about. It's almost 8, but I'm going to go through the steps, real basic steps that you could take to move a house. Every jurisdiction is different. In Des Moines, everything I'm going to say applies to Des Moines, but I think a lot of things could also apply to Iowa City and other areas. First, check with your local traffic and transportation department, Des Moines Traffic and Transportation, for a house moving permit. Say, I want to move this house. Get a permit. They have a list of things on that permit that you got to do, just like, steps you got to take. You've got to secure a lot for the move. And as the attorney, I always would say any offer should be subject to securing a house moving permit, financing, everything. But just lock that lot up so you know where you're going to move it. Once you've done that, call a reputable, licensed, and insured house mover. Like I said, we use O'Neill. They're from North Dakota. They work all over the Midwest, but there's other great local companies that do this as well. And talk to people that have done it before. Contact all the utilities. We thought we did that, but we didn't. So make sure all the utilities, especially in city moves, contact them and go over the route with them. Walk the route with them. Make sure you'll know what it's going to cost, because all this moving the lines, unfortunately, costs money. And that is a real major expense, especially when you're in the city, because there's all kinds of overhead lines. Work closely with the city forester. In the city of Des Moines, that's a key person you got to talk to, because all these house moves require you to trim trees in the public right-of-way, and that person has the ability to stop a house move. So it's very important you work with the city forester. Talk to the neighbors about your plans. Why are you trimming the trees? Why are you doing this? And chances are, once you explain yourself, you go door to door. Most people who live in these neighborhoods want to see houses saved anyway. They can say, okay, I can withstand having a branch cut in front of my house if you're going to save this old house. You're going to have to draw a site plan for the site, just like you would new construction. Contact a foundation contractor. Work with the house moving company to determine where you're going to have to put the beam pockets, because they put those big iron beams underneath. And so on your plans, you've got to make sure that the foundation guy leaves space for the beams to pull out. Okay? And work with the building department to make sure that like in Des Moines, they're getting better. But for a while, they said, if you move a house, you've got to update everything. Plumbing, electrical. And a lot of times you want to do that anyway. But if you don't want to spend the kind of money to totally bring it up to code, see if you can get away with just doing, partial updating. And I think what I'd like to do is just end before we go to questions. Just basic things, and a lot of folks I'm sure that are in this room, I'm preaching to the choir here, but things for maybe folks that are watching this on TV, they're thinking about restoring a house, and it doesn't apply necessarily to a house move, but any house. Consider hiring an architect, especially if it's a big renovation. It's an expense that a lot of people don't want to do, but it makes it easier, especially when you're trying to keep the character of a house, whether it's for an addition or for renovation. An architect is a good way to go. We would have been way out of luck if we didn't hire an architect. Sign a contract with each, I don't know. You don't need to sign a contract with each professional tradesperson, but make sure you get a written bid. Once they start the work, that's a contract. So make sure you get a written bid from every tradesperson you work with. Jen's great about this. Whenever she sees something in a magazine or anything, she rips out pictures of a kitchen she likes or anything. Keep a little file of that. That's really how we came up with most of the ideas in this house. In fact, she went so far as to make a bound notebook of things we really liked. Take pictures of every room you're going to remodel, because you'll be able to look at it later and say, either, I cannot believe we did this, or this is how it looked before. So that's a really good tip to make, especially with digital cameras now. You can just take tons of pictures. And once if you're, for example, if you do any demolition in the house, you can tell a lot by tearing apart a wall what has been there before. Old, shadows of the old trim, all kinds of stuff. So make sure you keep an eye out for that. As Jen talked about, save any building parts you find. Sometimes, you want to just throw everything away, but they don't make some of these things, like even as minute as we end up saving all our pulleys on our windows. And I can't tell you how happy I am I did that, because you could probably buy them, but they've got these little ornate pulley things, and so many of the ones I had broke, so I had to go from other windows and put them. Try to save all the old 2x4s you can. Pull the nails out. It really, again, they don't make lumber like they used to, and they're so much stronger. One other thing I would recommend, if you're rebuilding windows, one of the products I used, or just any household product you get a really strong glue for, stuff called Gorilla Glue is awesome, but make sure you wear gloves, because the first time I did it, I didn't wear gloves, and it doesn't come off. So I had hands that were just black, and I had to go to court, and people were, what did you change a tire? What's going on here, So, wear gloves, but that's great stuff. So that's, general tips, and obviously there's so much more we could talk about, and we welcome any questions you have. But it's been a fun project. We're glad we did it, but we're not going to move again. We'll work in other houses, but we're not going to move, because this is just the house we're going to have kids in and everything. So we're happy we did it. So.
Was it the home recycling exchange that you guys do material?
Yes, the Home Recycling Exchange is a group. In fact,
Can you turn the lights on now?
oh, sure. I'm going to turn the lights on here. Hey. Home Recycling Exchange is a great organization in Des Moines. You sound like you're really familiar with them. They take people come in with new materials that didn't work out, like they have a window they bought, they can't take it back, they try to install it. And they have all kinds of salvage materials. And it's cheap, relatively. I think we paid, I don't know what we paid. I can't remember what we paid for our trim, but we were able to use the wood from an old Victorian, all the trim work in an old Victorian that was being demolished. They went in and salvaged it out. We bought it from them. They're a nonprofit organization, helps them out, and really we got what we needed. Is there anything like that in Iowa City?
There's a salvage farm here, and there's one in Burlington also that does the same thing.
I think that my sense is that Iowa City is probably farther along salvage-wise than Des Moines is, because there's still a lot of things in Des Moines, I think, that we tend to throw away, and they're starting to catch on, But groups like Home Recycling Exchange are really helping out, and also just recently they opened a new Habitat for Humanity. It's called the Restore, yeah. So that's the kind of stuff. But we got some salvage. The cabinets, we got a place in Minneapolis called Bauer Brothers. If you ever want to go for a Saturday to spend 3 hours just looking around at things you cannot believe that were just ornate mantles, and it's incredible. Just like a football field full of salvage stuff. So.
What kind of response did you get for the magazine article?
I'll let Jen answer that. She's the...
I actually am the letters editor, so I got to read all the letters. I read all the letters that come into the magazine, and so it was fun to get feedback from people saying, this was inspiring, and I've emailed with a number of people and shared more details about our project and also learned about other people's projects. And I think that's one of the things that's just really fun about any sort of publication is that it becomes a forum for exchange of ideas. And so I think things that people found inspiring about it is that we were willing to do as much of the work that we could ourselves. Again, we're not tradespeople. Sometimes we wish that we were, and maybe that'll be something we'll explore in the future. But that we were just really committed to local history, I think, was something also that resonated, and we know that we're certainly not the only people that are doing that, and that I think that's something that's just an important resource in Iowa in general is the history that we have in our neighborhoods.
We recently read that there are about 200 homes in Des Moines which have been slated for demolition. Of those homes, do you know if any of them are on the National Register?
Is that for... Oh, right, okay, yeah.
They're actually, the article that came out was a little bit sensational. I don't want to say it wasn't true, but there are 200. The way that in Des Moines, unfortunately, as it stands, the city ordinance, there's basically you either the house is in good enough shape to live in, or we're going to tear it down. There's like no in between. So there's no ordinance that says as a property owner or landlord, if you don't keep your property up, the city's going to condemn it and take it from you and give it to someone that will fix it up. Okay, and a lot of that has to do with due process. You got to make sure you don't take someone's property away from them without compensation. But to answer your question, I don't know.
There are in River Bend.
Okay, there are probably several houses in the River Bend neighborhood
in particular
that are listed on the National Register. I know that River Bend is working to try to save those, but the difficulty we're finding in Des Moines is that unless the property owner wants to sell the property, it's very difficult to get it out of their hands. And they will and I don't understand this mentality, because it's like, you have a piece of property, you want to make the most money, you're an investor, you want to make money on it, but they just won't let it go. And some of them are torn down as a result.
And then the lots are tied up with the liens that have been placed on it by the city, and so then you end up with vacant lots that are never infilled. So it is a serious problem. The good news is that there are houses that appear on the list, and then the property owners make the necessary repairs. There's a list that said, an actual list, and Larry served on Housing Appeals Board, so he's worked very closely with this process. And as long as you complete all of the repairs that are on the list, the house will cycle off of that.
There's actually a house that we're working on. Our latest project is a house that's on that list, and it was going to be torn down by the city. And we finally got the landlord in that case. It was vacant for like 3 years. And again, don't understand why it's sitting there. But finally, he agreed to sell it, and we got it for a good enough price that we could rehab it, and we're selling it as a single family. But that's until we can change the ordinances. That's what we're faced with. And Des Moines is looking at options now, looking at their options for, different ways to condemn a property and use of eminent domain, take the property from a landlord or unfortunately it's usually landlords, absentee owner, to take the property and then turn it over to someone through a RFP, sell it to someone on the open market.
Did you have a budget for the move? You mentioned
Yeah.
that you exceeded the cost.
Yeah, the cost of the move was higher than we had budgeted for because of the delays, and it wasn't I'll tell you what we paid. We paid this was a pretty significant, large house to move. The movers charged us around $12,000. It was about a 6-block move. We got utilities. I think we ended up spending $7,500 to Mid-American.
13 hours worth of
13 hours worth of
time.
overtime, and it adds up. They had 2 utility line crews there. The guys are getting paid twice what they usually get paid, and we had all these other things. So we ended up roughly about $30,000 move, and that's not cheap. You got the house for $1, but you got to buy the lot, you got to do the foundation. So, but if you can get a lot, the key to these things, house moves, is to get a lot that's close by. Unless you're in the country. If you're in the country, you can move it anywhere. But if you need to move a house, try to get a lot that's close by. Because then it's a lot cheaper. And don't move a 2.5-story house like in the city.
Did you try to use federal tax credits?
There's no, unfortunately, this is another one of those things that I kind of scratch my head and wonder why they wrote the law this way. The law is written in such a way where only commercial property or investor property, 4 or more units, can be used for federal tax credits, the 20% federal tax credit. And again, this National Trust has tried to change that. And for some reason, despite all the tax cuts we seem to be having, they don't think that's a good tax incentive to be giving out. The state tax credits we were able to use. The state allows for owner-occupied structures listed on the National Register or potentially eligible for National Register status, or in a district to take advantage of a 25% tax credit up to $25,000. But the problem with those is that they're underfunded, and right now I think they're out to 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road before you can actually get the credit back to you. I could stand up here and pretend I'm like Carrier Bush. Yeah, let him take it. Yeah. Thank you.
I just have a couple quick things to say, and we can go, First, congratulations on being able to do this in a place like Des Moines. I've heard people from Des Moines talk about horror stories of just the way the legal stuff is set up there. Apparently, at some point in certain demolitions, the city takes possession, and at that point, the city attorney says we can't possibly be responsible for any kind of liability that might happen to anybody about anything. We got around that in Iowa City with the owners of the houses that we demolish or take the parts out of by just simply buying a liability insurance policy. We're covered. The owner has no problem. I don't know why it would be that hard in Des Moines. I want to mention the name of a couple other house movers. There's Goodwin House Moving from Washington, Iowa, about 40 miles south of here, and Aylesworth Brothers from Wadena, Iowa, about 100 miles north of here. They're both really good. They've been doing it for decades. Your statement about the lines going across the right-of-way, the street. See, I'm just naive enough that when somebody calls it a right-of-way, I think that's the public thoroughfare through the community. People can go through there. Why in the world, if you're trying to do something for the good of the community, like move a house, can a for-profit company charge you for going down the public thoroughfare? And it's not really it would be nice to find out the answer to that question. I mean, why? You said in the East, sometimes they'll move them for free because they have a financial advantage of not having to move more wires. I've heard about places in California that have done that. I don't know why. If it's just not inherently the thing to do, why are they still getting away with it in our town? The other quick thing to mention is when we were first getting our Peninsula project going, addition on the north side of town, I talked to the guy who's going to be the contractor for that to see if they might set aside 6 or 7 lots for us to move houses to, and he, in another effort to win the contract, said sure. So I took that to be good enough, but now I understand the contractor has been changed, and I haven't talked to the new one, but I'm sure he'll be just as agreeable, and we'll have a nice place to move houses to. We do have a salvage barn in Iowa City, and we try to get as many house parts as we can just for this kind of thing, because you can't get cypress or you can't get fir flooring that's going to look the same. But you did a great job on this place. That's all.